All right, greetings, folks. Sorry about that. This is Rob, Central Apologetics, with Dr. David Falk, and he's been very gracious. It's sort of like a last minute, needed to change some timings, and I appreciate all of you out there as well for hanging in there. And let me just reiterate that I'm sure a lot of you are aware of my guest here. Because of certain events that's recently transpired. But before I get into that, let's just, we're all Christians here, and my my interactions with your work is basically sort of like off the cuff. I was sort of given a link. I didn't know who you were, but I found your videos very
That's
interesting.
okay. Nobody does.
Yeah, well, and I, trust me, like, I love, but I'm not into, say, popular, like, oh, look at this popular speaker. I actually find it a lot more interesting to find the niche, because that's technically how my channel started as well. I started in that niche sort of thing. Obviously, someone like, say, Michael Heiser, whom, by the way, I saw his Unseen Realm book on your bookshelf in one of your...
It is on my bookshelf. I have a lot of interesting things on my bookshelf.
Yeah.
I'm a very wide and eclectic reader. You'll also find the Mobile Suit Gundam manga up there as well.
Right. So yeah, the takeaway line I took from him, sort of like a life lesson, is I like things old and weird, and also a little bit niche and rare. And also the other takeaway line is, the world is stranger than you think, but thinking should not be strange. And in my...
Sounds like good advice.
Yeah. In the last week that's transpired, that I've been basically binge watching your video, and let me just put it out there publicly. I'm a fan. I guess I'm sort of like, I have a crush for the early date view of the Exodus, purely because of the heroes of the faith, I guess. Like Gleason Archer was an Old Testament scholar, and Walter Kaiser, who's still currently living, and now obviously Michael Heiser is a little bit more open-minded, and he's more... No, I think the late date view holds water and weight. Now he did pass a remark in his Exodus podcast series that he was part of some online forum back in like 10 years ago, when David Roll was part of that forum, some chronology forum. And,
the early date wasn't always the prevalent view amongst conservative Christians. It's actually a fairly recent view. It only dates back to like 1906.
And that's what blew me away when you were talking about the early date. I was just like, hang on a second, what?
Yeah.
I personally thought the Amenhotep sort of perspective was easily 500 plus years or something.
Nope. It gets its start with a Scottish theologian by the name of James Orr.
Okay.
And the sort of the background story to all this is, he wrote a theology textbook in 1906, basically going up against the documentary hypothesis and higher criticism. And then he sort of tags on this extra view, saying, well, I got this additional new theory about the date of the Exodus. So when he had introduced it, nobody had ever heard of this before. It was brand spanking new theory in 1906. And then it was later picked up by J.W. Jack in 1925. And that's when it was really popularized, was in 1925.
Okay.
And from then on, it sort of fell along denominational lines.
Okay. Because I was under the impression, because I was under the impression that the late date. So this may come to a shock to everyone in here, because everyone knows about my very careful, methodical, sort of like scholarly academic application or engagement with the biblical literature. And just to let you know personally, my walk into the faith has been about a 10-year journey, but about 5 years ago, I finally gave my life to Jesus. So the first 5 years was just that because I'm coming from a scientific background, and
Mhm.
I just need the data points to sit like all the ducks in a row, and then the emotions come after that, right? So
Right.
that was kind of like my journey, and I thoroughly love, because my family hails from like a more of a European British background, and so I couldn't help but sort of find a kindred spirit with just the type of literature that I was reading, because the way they wrote and spoke and how they engaged with the data points. So, for example, Gleason
Mhm.
Archer was that typical individual that was he didn't hold any punches. Like he went for it. He
Mhm.
seemed legit, straightforward. And then when he engaged with the early date, and then I was comparing. I was deliberately then comparing with what you were saying in your video series, and I couldn't help but go, "Oh, now I can see a very subtle, you know, fundamentalist sort of polemic at play here. Where, for example, the 40
Mhm.
years, right? So 40
Yep.
times 12, right? So you
Yep.
very carefully were talking about numbers being, it could be symbolic and so on. But Gleason Archer goes out of his way and says, "No, there's no such thing as that. It's symbolic." And then he stops there, and I'm just like, okay, make an argument why. Like, but you see, back before I was
Yeah.
watching your work, and before I was really engaging with Hoffmeyer's work, I sort of just took it for granted. Like, maybe he has a point. Um, yeah. So
Well,
in other words,
Gleason
I
Archer
was
was a very
agnostic about
interesting
it.
character anyway.
Who? Sorry.
Gleason Archer.
Right.
I actually went to Trinity Evangelical Divinity School.
Hmm.
Now that's where he was teaching. Was at TED's.
So you were part of what? Was he alive and you were a
He
student?
had died just 2 years before I started at
Okay. Okay.
TED's.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so I just sort of missed him, but I overlapped with many people who knew him,
Okay.
and they all sort of recognized what a big, larger than life figure he was.
Hmm.
But at the same time, they kind of went, "Ooh, some of the stuff he wrote." Eee.
All right. Okay.
So they don't use his writings much anymore at Trinity.
Oh,
They
interesting.
more
Okay.
they more prefer sort of, let's say, more solid scholarship.
Sure.
So even there, it's kind of moved on a bit.
Because I know the expositor's commentary on, say, Daniel. So
Mm-hmm.
Andrew, I forget his last name, but there's a guy named Andrew something, but Andrew Hill. He's now taken over. Like the revised edition is basically he's Daniel, and Gleason
Mm-hmm.
Archer was originally for Daniel. There's this stuff in there where he just said it like without any reservation. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's just my upbringing with the way you just say things. You just say it, and
Well,
that's yeah,
I'm a big fan of straight talk.
right,
I don't
right,
like beating around the bush. I don't like couching things in euphemism. I just tell it straight up.
right. So yeah, that's the thing. So coming into the faith, I was a theistic. I mean, I was an evolutionist, but obviously then
Mm-hmm.
tacking on God, so now theistic evolution. My engagement with soon after was with, say, younger creationists, and then soon I immediately started to notice, okay, obviously now there's a of recent history. So in the 1800s, the Seventh-day Adventist Church brought about the Seventh-day Adventist. I mean, this young creationist thinking,
Mm-hmm.
and so I knew there's a lot of nuance in the scriptures for thousands of years,
Mm-hmm.
especially from the patristics onwards, with respect to the creation story. And I suppose in this decade of my Christian walk, I haven't spent too much time in, say, the Exodus narrative. For
Mm-hmm.
example, when I was talking to you about Bob Rye, that's sort of like the extent of what I knew. Now he held to the Ramses perspective. Ramses the Great and the late date view, but
Mm-hmm.
um, I sort of just went, you know what? I'm still my area of specialty is still in the creation evolution sort of thing,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a big catch up on the Exodus narrative just before you and I are discussing this sort of thing. So but before we are in conversation, obviously, right now, my position was agnostic. So
Right.
I spoke with our good friend, and told him, look, just
And he is a friend.
yeah,
He is a
right,
friend.
yeah. And I said, look, just wait for the 5 years book. In fact, Walter Kaiser came out with a revised edition of A History for Israel, which is like a 2017 publication, and he changed his perspective. He said, look, maybe Amenhotep is not the pharaoh of the Exodus. It could be later down the track, some other pharaohs down the track.
There's just no way he could, even if you want to hold to an early date, there's no way Amenhotep II could be the pharaoh of the Exodus.
Right. Yeah.
It's an impossible proposition. And the reason why is because the chronology just doesn't work out in your favor. The problem is the Amarna letters pull all those kings to an earlier date, so that if you move Amenhotep II to 1440 or 1446, you now have a problem that Amarna letter 6 conflicts with that revised chronology. So it just doesn't work out. It's in this respect, I actually have more respect for, say, Bimson's view of an early date where it's Tutmosis III. And that comes with its own problems. It comes with a lot of problems.
Yeah.
But at least Bimson is trying to be consistent with what we have as far as the evidence for chronology.
So I was under the impression, and this is putting aside the data points, but notice you're being very deliberate with specific data points. I was under the impression that there's something wrong, like some form of like emotional feeling to have Ramses the Great as the pharaoh of the Exodus. Like, it's cooler to have Amenhotep as, like, were you gauging with that?
I've heard that argument.
Sure.
And the idea is, well, Cecil DeMille's loved Ramses II as say the Pharaoh Exodus, and therefore, that great film sort of inspired everyone to love Ramses II as the king of the Exodus. Therefore, what you're having here is a wish fulfillment fantasy.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Well, here's my issue with this. First of all, I didn't even watch the Cecil DeMille film until this year. Only at the beckon of another apologist. He goes, "What? You haven't seen the Cecil DeMille's film? What's wrong with you as an Exodus scholar?"
Right.
Right. Oh, you're probably right. So I did actually watch it just this year.
Right. Right.
So I didn't have that background, pushing me. And the second thing was I actually started off as a proponent of the early Exodus date. And
okay, you did. Okay,
I did. I was an early Exodus.
But you see, why?
Supporter.
That's the question. The why,
well, the why was because that's what was always taught around me.
Okay.
Because I actually grew up in those circles. So for me, I started off, but I had never examined the data. I had never examined the evidence. And it wasn't really until sort of I got, pressed into a corner as to, basically somebody approached me and said, well, you've got to believe in an early Exodus or you're a heretic. Well, why is it that important? Was the immediate question. I was interested in other things at that time. This was already when I was in grad school. I was already doing my third master's degree when this sort of came down. So when I actually did start looking into what is the data of the Exodus, it's like, okay, there's no way I can support an early view. This is just, cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs in the respect that it just doesn't match with the data. So it became very much an evidentiary issue for me. I've always had the philosophy of follow the data wherever it leads.
Sure. Yeah. That's basically the mindset I currently have as well. I know I've recently as well. I've sort of been in sort of like in gripe or in tension. There's no grease. It's really, the friction is definitely there with those who have a presuppositional apologetic and a fundamentalist sort of apologetic, and no, the 480, the First Kings 6:1, it has to be that sort of thing. And then the judge, I think it's Judges 11 or somewhere around there, where it speaks about the 300 something years.
Yeah, if you can trust any says.
Yeah.
Because he gets everything in that narrative wrong.
Right.
Everything. When he talks about, oh, your God, Chemosh, well, that wasn't their God.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, Chemosh gave you your land. Yahweh gave us our land. Well, that's wrong too. Yahweh gave everyone their land.
Yeah.
According to Deuteronomy 32. Mm-hmm. There's nothing in that speech that Jephthah says that's actually correct. And that's sort of the point, is he's not a credible witness. So can you take the 300 years of Jephthah for given when everything else is wrong?
Sure. Yeah.
The Bible. We talk about the inspiration of the Bible, but the inspiration of the Bible, we say, is inspired in what it affirms.
Mm-hmm.
If it doesn't affirm it, then that teaching, while recorded, is not actually inspired.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to take that Jephthah narrative as being something that the Bible is not inferring, it's just recording.
Mm-hmm. So why, again, just a random question, and it's probably a typical question that you'd be asked. Why then do we have such figures just given just like that? So First Kings 6:1, and then the Jephthah thing. Like, why is it so specific? Notice this is Gleason Archer, how he would sort of come at this. Yeah.
Well, in the case of First Kings 6:1, what we have is a temple dedication inscription. It's a temple dedication. We find these all over the ancient Near East. This is not something unique to First Kings 6:1. We find them in Mesopotamia. We find them in Egypt. And they all have sort of a similar formula. They all start off with this set of numerology attached to an event. And that numerology does not have to be exact. It never is. There's not one case from the ancient Near East where that numerology is exact.
Sumerian king list as an example, Genesis 5.
Well, there's the example of the temple dedication inscription of Tukulti-Ninurta I.
Okay.
Where he says 720 years preceded the foundation of the Temple of Ishtar by Elishuma. Okay. Now, it wasn't 720 years. But what 720 years is its numerology. It's 60 times 12.
Okay.
Sound familiar?
It's
40 times 12.
40 times 12, yeah.
That's because in Assyrian Mesopotamian mathematics, 60 is the number par excellence because it's sexagesimal mathematics. Right?
Yeah.
So now you take that same principle and you look at, say, the Levant, where 40 is the principal par excellence. And this is where you get things like the Moabite stela, where it talks about the 40 years of Omri. Well, Omri didn't reign 40 years. He reigned 12. What's it talking about? It's talking about a sense of perfection. It's talking about a sense of long time, the ideal time. Any long stretch of time can be 40 years. If you're talking weeks or days, it can also be 40 weeks, 40 days. We see this in, say, the temple dedication stela, the 400-year stela of Seti I, where he's rededicating the temple of Baal at Avaris to a 400 years, 4 months, 4 days of a King Nebti.
Right.
4 days, really, of some ancient Hyksos king and nobody can ever remember?
Right.
Yeah, I don't
Right.
think so.
So this is okay. So I was in conversation actually earlier today, actually. So yeah, I haven't actually slept all day. But I was in conversation with someone who took, say, the Jericho readings very literally. In fact, even the whole 24-hour, the sun stopping still. And I was telling him, look, based and by the way, just to let you know, David, because of my training in the scientific realm of things, so peer review academia, literally across the aisle in my library, I see the humanities section and the religion section, and I just venture out. And so since I'm already trained to know what to look for, I do the same thing now as a Christian, but still as an amateur, I know that, but I know what to look for. And obviously, I'm coming across a lot of fascinating stuff. For example, J. Glenn Taylor, his monograph Yahweh and the Sun, and in there he goes into that no, it's not that the sun's stopping, but it's the deity that's in that valley that Yahweh is subjugating. And so I find that very interesting. And then obviously you have Colin Humphreys who says, no, well, what? Like I see what you're saying there, but there could be a possible solar eclipse. That's because guess what? Solar eclipse can sort of calibrate our timing with the pharaohs, and it was released in 2016.
Archaeoastronomy has had its better days.
Okay, because I heard that as well in your talk as well. You're talking about
archaeoastronomy. Yeah. It used to be like in the 1970s, 80s, even up to the really early 90s. Archaeoastronomy was still held in very, very high regard.
Sure.
But these days, nobody considers it reliable for dating anything anymore. Like even something like a solar eclipse, which is probably the most notable of these. You need a 96% solar eclipse to even be visible to the human eye to show any difference, just because of the magnitude of the brightness of the sun.
Right.
Now you start to get into stellar observations where it's on the horizon, and you can be off by days, which accounts for years when you actually come down to dating chronology based upon this. It's even something as simple as, say, counting the cycles of the month, like for a lunar calendar, can be very fraught with error just because of the way people are gauging when is one cycle beginning and one is ending. It's really problematic, which is why chronologists really don't use it anymore.
I see. Okay. Yeah, I'm just bringing it up to point out that I told him, look, as far as I can tell, I have a Bible atlas that shows the arrows of where they were doing the Jericho military thing. And when you add up the distances, it's like 50 miles or even more than 50 miles as far as the distances and how and where they're positioned and so on. And you mean to say the sun was standing still for 24 hours to fit these distances? And I know that they weren't traveling 50 miles in 24 hours.
No.
And I'm coming across commentaries that say, no, at minimum 2 weeks, the whole war thing takes place. Like Richard Hess, for example, mentions that. And yeah. And so I'm taking the Kol Yom, the old day language. I'm sort of seeing that like a long period, like all this period, Yahweh is sovereign until the whole thing stops. And yeah.
I think we've got a real problem right now with modern readership, which is that we often graft our own culture and our own sort of mental experience and framework upon the past. And I think this is particularly problematic when we start talking about, say, things in the Bible, spaces, distances, geography. Like, for example, back in the ancient Near East, if you had two towns that were separated by 2 kilometers, that was considered 2 towns. That wasn't considered 1 town, ever. Now we get into a motor vehicle 2 kilometers whipped by, and that's like 30 seconds. It's just
right.
But back then, it'd take you at least a half an hour, 45 minutes to walk between them.
Mm-hmm.
It was real physical distance to them. Whereas today, we blink and it's gone. It's passed us by.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact is that we are enculturated to the automobile to such a degree that we don't even appreciate the scale of distance anymore. And I deal with this often with, say, the Exodus, because, I'm having to keep people straight on the fact that Avaris and Paramses were two separate cities at all times. They were never one city.
Because you see this.
Go on.
No. I was just going to say this. The reason why I brought up the long day as an example is because you were getting at the 40 times 12, and I was sort of engaging with. Do we really need to take as exactly 24 hours? Like, imagine like God going, okay, now it's exactly 24 hours. Now let's continue with the.
There are some early date scholars who take the 430 years mentioned in Exodus 12 of the Egyptian sojourn as a literal 430 Julian years down to the exact day. Okay.
And then you show that was off by 10 years or something when you do the other.
Well, it's off by a lot more than that. It's when you say, for example, when you take, say, Exodus 6 into account, where it talks about how long they actually were there, it's more like 350 years.
Oh, okay.
Or less.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
It's at most 350 years. So but the fact is that that's a reading that we get, that 430 years in Egypt. That's a reading we get from the Masoretic text. If we take the other textual traditions, say the Septuagint and the Samaritan Pentateuch, it reads in Egypt and Canaan, as does the New Testament. So in the New Testament, it tells us that it was 430 years from the time of Abraham's promise.
What do you think is going through Paul's mind when he's saying that?
Well, I think Paul is reading it from the Septuagint.
Okay.
So I think that's where he's getting his source from when he's writing that, and it's a good call. It's a really good call because the Septuagint actually probably reflects the original autographs in this case. Because when you start doing, say, lower textual criticism of, say, the Exodus and the Pentateuch, you really do have to consult the other text sources as well. So when you've got, say, you can have between 1 to 5 witnesses of any text. If you got one, well, you don't have a lot of choice. But if you've got, say, a text where you have the Septuagint, the Samaritan Pentateuch, maybe some Dead Sea Scrolls, maybe some third-party scrolls somewhere, and you start reconstructing what was originally in the autographs, you get some very interesting readings.
And they're not haphazard. There must be.
They're not haphazard.
reason.
Everything comes. All the readings seem to follow a certain train of reasoning.
Right.
Okay. So, like, for example, in Septuagint versus the Pentateuch on that Exodus passage, you might find Egypt and Canaan reversed in one passage. But the fact that both appear in the passage tells you that they were probably in the autographs. Two of the 3 witnesses attest that. So then you combine that evidence with, say, Exodus 6, which says that they were there less than 350 years. Combine that then with the New Testament and Paul, and then you pretty much at that point realize what the autograph would have originally said.
Right.
But that's an important skill that I think a lot of people in this debate have not actually incorporated into their tool set.
Right, I see. So then, since those differences are there, we just honor the fact that they're there, and just so if we honor those differences, do we then just go, okay, now let's just put them aside and let's move on to something new, or do we sort of still work with those differences and keep sort of mulling over if there's anything new we might find within those differences. Again, in the context of Egyptology and Exodus studies, and
well, you do find little things here and there that sort of poke out at you and say, okay, here's something I might have to consider. Again, you're following the evidence wherever it leads, whether that's textual evidence, let's say a lower text critical evidence, whether that's archaeological evidence, whether that's textual evidence from third-party texts, whether that's, say, evidence of toponymy. There's a lot of evidence that can be consulted to really shape one's thinking here. You don't have just one piece of evidence. And I think this is one of the problems. I think this is the real reason why biblical studies needs Egyptology, is because all they've got is the text and a few theories. If that's your sort of basis to go on, you can go very, very far adrift and not even realize it. So you do need to consult, say, the archaeological sciences in order to determine what that missing context is that helps shape our understanding of the biblical texts.
Right. Yeah, my mind's flowing with all sorts of questions at the moment.
Questions are good. I think my whole channel is based upon that.
Right. Let's see here. I'm trying to be systematic. So
hard, isn't it?
I'm all for. You see, here's the thing. I'm like you're saying, where the evidence leads. If someone like Lee Snarcher were wrong on the Exodus timing and so on, I'm fine with that. And I'm actually, for example, I do have disagreements with him on other things as well. So it's, in other words, we should not make your so-called favorite scholar like some saint, like some folks, infallible. So
we're all fallible. We all make mistakes.
Right.
I make lots of them, even more than one in a day. It's amazing. It's hard to believe it's true.
Sure. Okay. Let's, like, for example, someone in the outside chat asked this question: how much power does this old anti-late Exodus argument still have? So, quote unquote, late Exodus dates force you to condense Israelite Judean chronology a lot, adding lots of co-regencies, etc. And just to quickly,
it doesn't.
Okay.
Doesn't affect it at all.
In your recent series, you were saying something like, in fact, to be honest, I think it was connected to the IP review. You were saying that as like the cutting edge research as of maybe a year ago or something further supports the late date view than the early date. Can you expand on that a little bit more?
Sure. And it comes down to Jericho.
Okay.
In order for you to have a consistent Exodus narrative, you need two other consistent narratives that go with it. You need a consistent Joseph narrative, and you need a consistent conquest narrative, because the incidents, the events are interrelated. So if you have an inconsistent Joseph narrative, you're going to end up with an inconsistent Exodus. If you have an inconsistent conquest, you're going to have an inconsistent Exodus. Now, what happened was that at Jericho, where we had the excavations, it was first excavated by Garstang and then by Kathleen Kenyon. Now, one of the real mysteries of Jericho, and Jericho was never a great site anyway. It was badly eroded by wind erosion. So it's never been a pristine site. But what Kathleen Kenyon found was these middle bronze fortifications, these big stone slab fortifications. They're beautiful, but they're, difficult to build, hard to maintain, etc. She dates these fortifications to the destruction of these fortifications to about 1550 BC. This has been a problem for any narrative of the Exodus, because the next sort of town remains you find on the site date to the Iron Age. So this has created a lot of problems for saying a consistent exodus. Because when you say, look at Hatzor, another town supposedly destroyed by Joshua, the only sort of destruction layer you find there dates to about 1200 BC. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So your choice between 1550, 1200, and then 1000, you're going to have some issues there. So what has happened recently within the last year, and there was always these little things that were at Jericho anyway, that indicated that there was another city there between the Middle Bronze fortifications and the Iron Age city, which was they did find a piece of a destruction layer that dated to the Late Bronze Age, which is 1200 BC. But it had been dismissed because it was just not a very large section. So people had thought, well, this is just Kenyan play into the orthodoxy, to the scholarly orthodoxy. Yeah.
Right.
But then there was also this one of Garstang's finds was a scarab from Amenhotep III in one of the tombs. So you now had a late bronze cemetery. Well, then that raised the question of, well, how can you have a Bronze Age cemetery without a Bronze Age city? People are not dragging their dead hundreds of miles to just bury it at Jericho. It doesn't work that way. So what happened just last year was Lorenzo Nigro, his excavations at Jericho, discovered that there was actually a late Bronze Age city that was rebuilt there, but using mud brick. So he was using mud brick casemate walls. They were using mud brick casemate walls when they reconstructed the city at Jericho. And then what happened was that was destroyed in the late Bronze Age, and then subsequent builders leveled the site, destroying most of that late bronze layer.
So what BC period are you talking about here? Like
1200.
1200.
Roughly 1200. 1200, 12, maybe 1220.
Okay.
But it's in that time frame.
Okay.
So that definitely puts it in, say, a late date context.
Right. Because I was following that link as well. You linked it in one of your video descriptions about Jericho. And
that matches the destruction layer we find at Hatzor.
Right, okay. Now I'm going to put you on the spot here, just again, because I'm all about data point comparison over here. So this is Michael Heiser in his Bible Unfiltered.
Here's I know where this is going.
Well, I had him on a night or two ago, because he literally said, "Hey, I'll have time to kill. Let's just do it like a Q&A." But this is. I mean, Michael Heiser, he's very open-minded. He's definitely. I know he's late date. Like this is chapter 20.
He's a little too open-minded sometimes.
Sure, yeah. So yeah, he says here the ongoing Battle of Jericho, and then I won't read all this, but I mean he goes through the typical, if it's, oh my bad, if you go, if you take this 40 years literally, then it's 40 to 46 and so on. But then he says here that you have archaeologists putting it at, say, 1250 BC, but he says here, these archaeologists claim the evidence for Jericho's fall points to a date nearly 200 years later, around 1250. So, okay. But archaeological work on Jericho has shown that the city was uninhabited from 1550 BC to about 1300 BC. The archaeological record shows that the city had no walls, which contradicts and, they argue, corrects archaeological work conducted in the early 20th century that revealed bone walls dating to around 1400 BC.
This is out of date.
This is out of date. Okay.
This is out of date.
Yeah. Because this is 2017. He wrote this publication.
Yeah, this is out of date now.
Okay. Right.
The Nigro study completely blows that away.
So can you expand a little bit more on what he's saying here about this burn walls? Like, what's Heiser getting at over here, if possible?
I think he might be quoting Bryant Wood here, because there's no burnt walls that date to 1400 BC at Jericho.
Okay.
So my guess is he's quoting Bryant Wood, a study that nobody takes seriously.
Right. Okay.
But I can't say that for sure without that's the only other place I've seen this.
Yeah, he is referring to this guy named T. Michael Kennedy, but this is in the
That's Titus Kennedy. Okay, that's Titus Kennedy, and Titus Kennedy here would be quoting Bryant Wood.
Okay.
All right.
Interesting. So, but
yeah,
he
nobody takes that for real. Here's my issue with Heiser.
Okay.
So I mean, I like a lot of work he's done. Okay, I like a lot of work that he's done, but there's sometimes he's a little too open-minded about some of his sources. I'm not a big fan of Kennedy. I'm not a big fan of Bryant Wood. No serious archaeologist of that particular region would put a gold star on their work. But he also consults, say, chronologists that are not exactly sound methodologically. Like he'll, give a certain nod to Bimson and David Roll, people who are not qualified to do this kind of work.
Right.
So I do have an issue that Heiser sometimes plays fast and loose with things that are sort of outside his specialization.
Right, I see. Yep. Yeah, and I mean, I can sort of see what you're saying in that, because I remember listening to his Exodus podcast series where he did say, look, I've been involved with this chronology discussion debate thing. In fact, there was a specialized forum just dedicated to that, and David Roll was part of that. But Heiser was very, at the same time, very specific in saying, look, I have my reservations. It's not like I'm believing this hook, line, and sinker sort of thing.
Yeah.
In fact, David Roll actually, because it's
junk archaeology.
Well,
it's junk archaeology.
I took a snippet of that, of what Heiser was saying there. I put it on my channel, and then David Roll actually commented saying, "How dare Heiser be like basically, so rude and like if he wants to have a discussion, like he actually had to go." Yeah. But yeah, I mean, just to show you, so Heiser does say down here, he says, I mean, he's going through the whole, like, look, the 40 years could be symbolic. And then he says, it's important to remember that while the battle over Jericho still rages, it's not a death match for biblical inerrancy.
And I would agree with that. Look, I would agree with that. I think there's the possibility of several opinions here. But I think right now the evidence best supports one particular view.
Sure.
And I'm always going to go with the evidence.
Yep. Now, with respect to Jericho, quickly, do you believe God did it, as this super chat is saying? Like the walls, was it some form of hypernatural miracle that took place? Or what's going on with that wall?
I don't comment on miracles.
Okay.
I'm a historian.
Mm-hmm.
I've got my beliefs. Okay. But if you ask me as a historian, I'm going to give you a historian's answer.
Okay. Go for it. Share away.
A historian's answer is, I think it was a historical event.
Okay.
Okay. How it happened, that's not a historian's question. That's a theologian's question. If I put on a if was God and did God do it? That's a theologian's question.
Right.
That's not a historian's question. And if I was to be a theologian at the moment, I would say, yeah, sure, absolutely.
Sure.
But do I know how God did it? No, I don't know how he did it. I don't think there's enough evidence to suggest how God did it.
So just
the miracle here is just, I mean, is in the timing. It came just at the time when Israel needed it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the miracle, no matter how God actually accomplished it.
Right. I mean, when you say timing, like the trumpet blast,
yep,
simultaneous.
Right then, right there, right when exactly in the nick of time when the Israelites needed it.
Do you still think it was? Because I'm not afraid to say it's still a natural event. So this is what I'm thinking is, yeah.
I'm not afraid to say it's a natural event either.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that you can strongly say too that God is separate from nature.
Exactly, that's what I'm getting at.
Exactly. I mean, I don't believe in the immanence of God. I think God is transcendent, and I want to be very, very clear about that.
Right.
But I also think God intrudes into nature to use nature for his particular will.
Sure.
But that's it's a theological question.
Exactly. Because I mean I talk with I engage with atheists sometimes, but even Christians sometimes. Like you mean to say God doesn't work supernaturally? And I'm like, look, these terms are like, for example, monotheism is a 17th century coined term. Like there was no such thing as monotheism in the first century, and so and when I look at Second Temple Jewish literature and how they sort of view God and the world, there's no dichotomy between God and the world. It's like, if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, this is Stardust, who I am and you and everything. Carbon-based life form. We're from the death of stars. But if you trace it all the way back to Big Bang and potentially God, that means this is a quote-unquote miracle. It's a supernatural thing, whether we are at the start of the Big Bang or 13.8 billion years later after the Big Bang. It's still one big, huge God divine thing. Now, and why would God contradict the laws he's already created to bring about?
I don't doubt that God could contradict his own natural laws. He can do anything he wants.
Sure.
There's nothing preventing him from doing this.
Sure.
But he doesn't have to do this either. There's nothing compelling him to break the laws of nature.
Sure. Yeah.
So he can decide to break the laws of nature. He can decide to use the laws of nature. God is only limited in how he limits himself.
And
where he has not set himself.
Yeah. That's the kenosis language, the Philippians 2 kenosis. That's the limiting part. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So could God have just torn down the walls of Jericho just because he felt like it with supernatural power? Sure. Could he have used a natural event? Sure. The other one's possible. But I wouldn't say that as a historian.
Because you're being inconsistent. You can't. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Another super chat came in saying, I think it's regarding books on Egypt, Old Testament. All I've got is Curid. So I think he's mentioning John Curid there, his commentary on Exodus. And I know Heiser is Curid, so yeah.
I would recommend for books on Egypt in the Old Testament, I would recommend Kenneth Kitchen's book on the reliability of the Old Testament. It needs a revision, but it's still really solid. I would also recommend the books that were done by James Hoffmeyer. They're also very excellent.
So Israel and Egypt is still cutting edge, do you think, even though it's
Israel and Egypt is I hear it's going under a revision.
Okay.
So it does need that one does need a revision. It does. A lot of new stuff has come out. But he's got a second book too that's very good. The green covered book. I can't remember.
The 2007 one, In the Wilderness Wandering or something, and
yeah, that one's still very good.
And the 2015 one, Akhenaten, the so-called Damascus Road
It's
experience?
good. The Akhenaten one is good. I just differ in my opinion on Akhenaten with Jim.
Okay.
I should say that I was Jim's student. I was also Ken's student. So
Right. Sweet.
I got both.
Now,
as far as I know, I'm the only student who ever did.
Oh, God. Yeah. No, honestly, I'm telling everyone out here as well, definitely check out David's channel, because there's just something about the way you approach the topic. It does remind me of, I don't know if innocence is the right word here, but when I first came across Heiser, okay, I'm sort of connecting you with Heiser here. So how I came across
I get that often.
My uncle was...
He's the serious one.
Well, I'm talking about Ancient Alien conferences back in 2004, where he approached the topic just like how you're approaching it on your YouTube. And I can sort of see you... I'm telling you this now. Because you started the way you started, I can see you now venturing into more of like a... And I know Heiser's into the celebrity mode right now, but at the same time, he sort of doesn't want to be. And trust me, I can sort of see you doing the same thing. I can see you venturing into that position, and then it's just up to you whether you want to pursue that. But yeah, just still keep doing your work. It's brilliant. But yeah, I had an uncle that was into Ancient Aliens, and all I did was Google, "Is Sitchin wrong?" And then Google responded back saying, "Sitchiniswrong.com." Like, and I just couldn't believe that there was a URL with that title, like that answer, right? And I didn't know who this person was. This is 2014 when I saw this. And naturally, I'm seeing a lot of sass, a lot of sarcasm and sass from, what I'm reading. And then sure enough, that led me to his blog, and then, the rest is history. But but basically, that's what I'm seeing with your organization of the lectures that you give, especially on your channel, like how you start the video, how you then introduce the topic, and then here we go. So yeah, keep that up is what I'm saying. So it's
okay.
Yeah.
Considering that most of my videos are done with cardboard and chewing gum.
All right. Now, someone asked a question, and again, I think let's also focus in on your specialization with your recent book that you released. So someone asked here, let's see. Oh boy, where is it? I'm trying to look for it, but it's a book titled "The Ark of the Covenant."
The Ark of the Covenant in its Egyptian context.
Yes, Egyptian context.
An illustrated journey.
So why did you write that book? Is it connected to Nogal's? Is it Nogal? Am I pronouncing his name right?
Nogel?
Yep.
Nagel, I think is yeah.
I read that Springer book.
Yes, and I actually have a paper going up against his paper that's supposed to be in volume 2 of that series if it ever comes out.
That's the comment, by the way. Someone's also bought your book. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Thank you. Somebody who actually has read my book.
You're right.
No, I actually go against Nagel's presuppositions in a lot of cases. The fact is that the idea that the Ark of the Covenant comes out of Egyptian ritual furniture isn't new.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually a proposition that goes back to Vigoro in the early 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the thing is, Vigoro only dedicated 4 pages to this proposition. And very little had been written on the Ark of the Covenant in its Egyptian context since then.
Mhm.
Well, since 1913, a lot has changed. Okay, we've got tons and tons of new discoveries. We've discovered the tomb of King Tutankhamun, King Tut. We're still trying to figure all that out. That was discovered in the 1920s, and we're still sort of cataloging and documenting everything from that.
Mm.
So there's been just this huge wealth of data that has come out since that time. Now, why I departed from Nagel was I was actually in grad school already writing my PhD dissertation when his article came out. So I was already halfway through my dissertation. And much of my
furniture stuff?
It is.
Yeah.
My dissertation was on ritual processional furniture in ancient Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the context study that I was doing to write this book.
Mm-hmm.
So much of what's in my dissertation is also in the book.
Right.
Okay. So when Nagel, he sent me his article before he published it. And I just sort of looked at it and goes, ooh, this is not an interpretation I'd really want to go with, because he goes with what's called a fertility or fecundity theory. Now, this was a theory that was really, really popular in the 1960s. Mm-hmm. Everything in the 1960s and early 70s was, everything in the ancient Near East was fertility based. They were, it's a war god. Oh, it must be fertility based war god.
Right.
And it really sort of got that level of almost silliness. So, since Baines published his books and his dissertation, the whole fecundity idea has fallen out of favor, and rightfully so. But Nagel seems to be influenced by that fecundity, that fertility aspects, and I don't think that applies to the Ark of the Covenant, really. I don't think it has anything to do with that. So my dissertation went in a completely different direction to what his papers suggest.
Is there any Egyptian influence on the Ark of the Covenant?
Yes, there is.
Why? So why the blueprint that you see in Exodus for that Ark, and where's that coming from?
Well, it's based upon what the people already knew about, or what they believed about concepts of deity, concepts of religion, how religions were supposed to work. People don't come to religion with just a blank slate. Mm-hmm. They come to religion with a lot of ideas already in their heads. In the case of the Israelites, they're coming to Mount Sinai with essentially hundreds of years of Egyptian religion and ritual. And that's what they understood. Now, even something such as simple as what is the nature of a divine being is very Egyptian. Almost every religion in the ancient Near East in the late Bronze Age had held the idea of localism. The idea that your God can only be one place at one time. We think of God today as being everywhere, that he can be anywhere he wants. He's big, he's vast. He can be in more than one place at once.
Right.
Well, that wasn't what people thought in the late Bronze Age. People thought that the God could essentially switch between idol to idol to idol. So when you have the Ark of the Covenant, it's sort of respecting that belief and then flipping that belief on its head.
Because of the way you approach it and the logistics.
Because the way the Ark of the Covenant actually handles those beliefs. Let me give you an example. In Egyptian ritual cult, what you have is a god that's represented by an idol that's usually between 6 and 18 inches. Okay? At night, you take your idol, you put it in the back of the temple in a naos, in a little shrine. You clothe it, you feed it, you put it to bed at night. It goes to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In the morning, you say, time to get up, oh God. You reclothe it, you feed it again, and then you carry it to the bark, put it inside the bark where it rules from that point until time to go to bed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what you have is an idol here that's carried to and from its place of power. It's cared for by human hands, and it goes to bed at night. Now, you take a similar shrine, like the Ark, but now you don't have an idol. But you have the presence of the god still there between the wings of the cherubim. What does this tell you about the nature of that kind of God that doesn't have an idol? It tells you it's not cared for by human hands. It never sleeps. It never leaves the throne.
Mm.
It takes that idea of Egyptian localism and completely flips it on its head.
Mm.
Just by changing the most subtlest thing of the ritual.
That's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That actually, okay, I'm just, again, going to do my usual, what you're saying there, my mind's racing right now, and I'm sort of connecting it to, because I run a study group, and we went through Revelation, and then we're currently going through Mark. In Revelation, I actually put together, I'm a huge fan of all the patristic perspectives, let's just say. I don't really take them dogmatically, but I see the wisdom in what they're saying.
I actually was really, really tempted to become a patristic scholar.
Okay.
Before I chose to be an Egyptologist.
Ah, interesting. Okay. So yeah, in this, so on this page here, I'm looking at in Revelation, you have this depiction of, like later on in chapter 17 and 18, this language of they made an idol out of this and this and this, and obviously John's utilizing Old Testament imagery. But when the patristics sort of was engaging with John, they I just couldn't help but notice their mockery, but not mockery just for the sake of mockery, but a little bit of sarcasm. You know, like
what from from one of the church fathers? Sarcasm, unheard of.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. It's just what they say here. You might as well just call them the present day atheists. Like they're no different to how modern day atheists argue against religion in general. But and here at the same time, I'm looking at them going, my goodness, I wouldn't be surprised if it's, say Richard Dawkins saying what I'm reading here.
Irenaeus just, tears the Gnostics apart. He's brutal.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, here's Athanasius.
He's really, really funny to read, but he does not pull his punches.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, Athanasius, for example, like Theodoratus is a pretty long quote, but I'll choose a short one. Athanasius says, how could he fail to pity them in this also, seeing that they worship them that cannot see? In hearing, they pray to them that cannot hear. Born with life and reason, people, as they are, call gods things that do not move at all, but do not even have life. And then here's the point. Here's his sarcasm coming in. Strangest of all, do they serve as their masters, beings whom they themselves keep under their own power? Mm-hmm. Is this, again, would you say this is
he's recognizing that tension between, say, polytheistic idolatry and the fact that it requires human intervention at every point.
Right.
So while sometimes I think the church fathers go a little too far in basically saying that these are just, say, images and the image itself is the god, and I don't think you'd find anyone in the late Bronze Age saying that. Okay. I think what people in the late Bronze Age would say is that the presence of the god is actually in the substance of the idol. Mm-hmm. kind of like the Catholic doctrine of transubstantiation,
Okay, I see.
where the real presence is in, say, the Eucharist. For a late Bronze Age believer in idolatry, they would say the real presence of the god is in the substance of the metal of the statue in the center of the temple.
Which is
And
what Paul's
all the other images, because we have to include them as well.
Yep.
All the other images are just places that God can just jump to and hear people and see people randomly.
Right. And that's, I think, Paul in 1 Corinthians 10, where he's like, you don't serve idols, you serve demons who sort of reside in that idol. Right, right.
By the first century, though, sort of the thinking about what idolatry was had changed a lot.
Okay, yep.
It had become less nuanced.
Right.
And frankly, it had become less nuanced even amongst those who practiced it. So this wasn't a nuance just amongst, say, the church fathers or, say, the New Testament writers. It had become less nuanced even amongst those who actually practiced the cults themselves. But that sort of comes with, say, the decline of certain civilizations as well, where, say, religious practice becomes itself less nuanced.
Since I already had it open, I actually forgot to.
Not that we're not seeing any less nuance in Christianity today.
No, definitely not. G.K. Chesterton actually said that. He's like, look, Christianity was birthed in a world, I'm sort of paraphrasing what he said, but it was birthed in a world of, superstition, first century stuff. And then he goes, today, it's no different. It's
I like Chesterton.
Right. And I mean, he's living in a time, obviously he's writing that pre everything we're seeing in the cinematic experiences, like, say, the Marvel movies and so on. But there's books out now by psychologists. There's one particular book called Why Do the Gods Wear Spandex? Or something like the title of the book. But that's the point. He's making the point, look, how ironic and hypocritical for the very folk that want to disparage, say, religion. They're the ones that sort of spend all this devotion, obviously in a hobby sense. Okay, for the sake of argument, to be honest, to be fair, they're not like making a religion out of Thor and Iron Man and all these, Hulk but when you see billions of dollars go into it, that tells.
I've known a high priestess of Thor.
Sure, and I know as well, but when I know them, they're like a tiny niche minority. Yeah, I'm just talking about the general public, how they just they get emotional and attached to the story, and it's just like, but guys, don't you realize that this is just, at the end of the day, fiction? And I understand where you're coming from, but the very criticism you're providing towards a genuine religion, Christianity, so then, in other words, you spend more time on, in this case, a Hollywood depiction of Thor, which is in itself not accurate to the original, but
Chrysostom once said, you know all the statistics of the chariot drivers and the gladiators, but you don't know the scriptures.
Right.
Well, nothing's changed as far as that goes. There will always there's in every generation there's that element that just would rather focus on entertainment.
By the way, just quickly, I had the PDF open. I forgot to bring it up, but the PDF next to this was this one by.
I know it well. You don't even have to. You don't even have to go through it. I know what it is.
Okay.
This one I know.
Thumbs up or thumbs down? I'm gonna
thumbs down.
Oh, whoops!
Definitely giving this one a thumbs down.
There we go. So you can put that on the camera. Okay. Why is it thumbs down? What's So why
Okay,
did the article? Why was it published, and what's happened since?
Okay. I am actually currently writing a peer review article against this one.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so this is wow. It's hard to even know where to start with this. It's the idea behind the article is that he takes a broken captive circle and then reconstructs it in such a way as he thinks produces the word Israel. And really, it's Manfred Gorg it's his idea essentially. Okay. Now, the problem is the conversions don't follow, say, normative transliteration conversions that we find in the ancient Near East. He's got to go through some linguistic gymnastics to get there.
Okay.
That's very problematic. And it's problematic because we do have a well-attested toponym for Israel in the Merneptah stela. And it looks nothing like this thing. Nothing like it. Let me give you a small example where this goes really wrong. Is its first two letters, which is the reed leaf and the vulture.
Should I keep this up, by the way, when you're explaining
this? You can keep it up, but the other one was actually more helpful.
The artistic drawing one?
Yeah, the artistic drawing, the reconstruction there.
Yeah.
Okay, so you see on the top there's a reed leaf and a vulture. Okay. Now, he wants to say that that's the letter Y. All right, it's not a great argument. It's not a conversion we normally see. But let's give him the benefit of the doubt there. The problem is he wants to then say, well, that I aleph converts to a Y, but that really then converts to a Y aleph. So he wants his cake and eat it too. He wants the two letters to merge into a Y, but he still needs that aleph there.
Okay.
So he then pulls it back out. Well, conversions in the ancient world don't work that way.
Okay.
The second problem is that character underneath those two, which is the Shah character. So he wants to say, yeah, that one right there. Okay. He then wants to use a half-truth here. And he wants to say that, well, there's a thing in late Egyptian where alephs or R's at the end of a sentence or at the end of a word can drop off and become an aleph.
Okay.
So he wants to say that this Shah was originally SR, ser. But the problem is it's a determinative. It's an atomic unit. You can't break a determinative apart that way. It just doesn't work. It's not something you ever find in Egyptian conversions. So he slurs this all together to get Ya, Shah, Ir, and he says, you're supposed to get from that Israel.
I see.
When Israel is Yisrael.
Right.
It's completely different. Now, the focus of my article is basically going to prove that there's a better, more simple reading to this.
Okay.
I'm not going to broadcast what that is until it goes into peer review.
Sure, yeah.
But there's a better, more simple reading that doesn't require any gymnastics at all and is a well-known toponym.
Okay.
Well-known place name.
Is this going to be published in the same article that this was? Oh, the journal.
No, I'm going to try for a different journal article. A lot of journals don't like you rebutting articles in the same journal.
Oh, okay. That's well, the JBL allows that. There's so many articles that I responded to, and anyway, but that's.
I might, but
right.
there's other journals too.
So just for the sake of the public out there, on the right-hand side, this is a reconstruction based on
Yeah.
what's already there on the left, and this line
Yeah.
here is what's missing. So from the line
This was missing,
to
and
the
that's
right is
and
what's
that's
missing.
a critical problem. That's a critical
Okay.
problem because I don't think that reconstruction is quite right.
This leg coming out, I mean, are you saying it could be some other object over here? It doesn't have to be.
I'm saying he's missing a character.
Okay.
He's missing a character, and I won't tell you which because it'll give it away.
Right. Okay.
But he's missing a character.
Okay. Well,
and as soon as you put that character in, you go, "Oh yeah, absolutely, that's what it is."
Okay. So any specialists out there? I'm pretty
any
sure
specialists out there would figure it out in a heartbeat if I said what it was.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I think to be okay. Let me just say this, David. This article was my sort of my. I'm just going to be public about this. This is sort of my last straw, maybe, about the whole early date thing. Because obviously the article's trying to say, oh, look, it goes before the Meneptah stellar sort of thing, right? And yeah, if you're already writing a response to this and saying, no, there's actually a response to this, then that's it. I have to go along with everything that's already there, right? Everything you already provided. This is just like an intriguing. Well, what do you know? Here's a. And then I have you now to sort of like, to my face, just tell me, well, this is it. So, yeah. Excellent. I'm
sorry I exposed the secret of potato chips.
Look, this trust me, I've been learning so much in the last week. I can't believe because that's just the thing. It's like my specialty is sciences, Genesis, a little bit New Testament. I guess Unseen Realm, Heiser's like Divine Council stuff. But I've been, I trust me, when you said, what, Rakmere, and
Rakmere.
Yeah, versus Rackmeyer. Like I would have said Rackmeyer. You see what I'm saying? Like, yeah, even those pronunciations, I was just learning a lot in this last couple of weeks, and
it's been a roller coaster for me too.
Right. Yeah. Can you? Okay, before I show some Bob Rye stuff, because I'm really interested to see how you engage with that. Maybe spend the next 5 or 10 minutes just sort of like chronologically in bullet point form. What is the Exodus for you, and the evidence for it? And in other words, the whole Avaris thing, and maybe there was a redactor that introduced
so much there. I mean, I think I said this in my very first video on the Exodus, is that it sort of grew out of control. Because there are just so many different issues with the Exodus and so many evidential discussions that need to go place. There's so much there.
Just quickly,
again, I get it. We can start just at the cap. I mean, just at the Joseph narrative, you've got evidential issues.
Sure.
Sorry.
No, I was just going to quickly say, Hofmeyr gave a talk at I don't know, some Alexandra school like a couple of months ago. They released the whole playlist, and in that he was talking about that. I maybe get this wrong, but you know how the whole like there's no evidence for the Exodus, but because you have the Exodus book, it's the Egyptian experience that's then transposed into this book we call the Exodus. I could be getting this completely wrong, but apparently Hofmeyr sort of
he's sort of soft pedaling it for his particular audience.
Okay.
That is already very much sort of indebted to the documentary hypothesis.
Okay.
So he's framing it at that particular talk it in such a way where he's sort of softly introducing the idea that some of these parts of the narrative are exceptionally ancient to an audience that thinks it's all relatively recent. By that, we were talking about Babylonian period. Mm-hmm. Okay? And to that extent, Hoffmeyer is correct. Now, he actually believes much, much more than that, to be very honest. But in that particular talk, he's basically saying that there are aspects of the evidence that points to the narrative dating to the 13th century BC. Mm-hmm. So when you're giving this to a crowd that believes it all was written in the 6th, 5th, 4th century, that's a tough sell, because they're already predisposed to think a certain way about the biblical texts. Mm-hmm. Now, he's going there, and he's using things such as toponyms, vocabulary. There's other internal evidence, such as cultural evidence. There's then the archaeological evidence. So there's actually a huge wealth of evidence here to draw on that you wouldn't even expect. And that's the problem I encounter as I do this series, is that what was supposed to be a simple four-part series quickly proliferated into 12 scripts. Okay? So this is not something that I was going to be able to pull off in one massive chunk. So I had to break it up for my particular viewing audience. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, I mean, you just take the episode of the brick making and you find all sorts of comparisons in Egyptian literature that you wouldn't expect to necessarily find, such as the brick makers and the straw. We have a papyrus, Papyrus Anastasi IV, that tells us about how brick makers in the Eastern Delta had run out of straw and servants to actually make the bricks. They needed more bricks, and they lacked the people and the straw. So it was an issue. We also see quotas being mentioned in other Egyptian texts. Mm-hmm. So there's just these little things in the text that are very congruent with the Egyptian culture that you wouldn't expect from a biblical text that was written in Babylon.
Right.
But that's...
Yeah.
Go on.
No, I was just wondering, that's the thing I don't want to button, like... No, I'm following with what you're saying. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, let's take, for example, even the whole idea of corporal punishment. Mm-hmm. Okay, in most countries and in most settings, even in the Levant and Mesopotamia, when you want to question somebody, and you want to get the truth out of them, how do you do it? Let's say you want to torture them.
Right.
Let's say you want to torture them.
Maybe I watched too many movies, but I was thinking of that first. Right.
Yeah. Well, okay. This is the question, right? What's the normal method of doing it? Mm-hmm. You ask your questions and you threaten them with violence, and then you beat them. Almost every country does it this way. But if you look at the biblical text, it tells you that they were beaten, then asked. In Exodus 5:14, they're beaten first. This is the Egyptian method of truth extraction. And we find this in Papyrus British Museum 00052.
Okay. You mean there's going to be a lot of...
And this was the standard modus operandi of Egyptian interrogators. They beat you first, and and then they ask you the questions. Because the beating first guaranteed the truth of your question second.
Okay.
It's backwards to almost every other country. But it's something that is really, really unique to Egyptian culture. And they'll savagely beat you till you're crippled. I mean, they just
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, they were. We have accounts in the tomb robbery papyri where they will beat a man or a woman's hands and feet till they're basically curled and crippled.
Oh, wow.
And then they ask the questions.
Wow.
This is how. I mean, we have to remember Egypt is a military dictatorship. They don't play nice. But we find this reflected in the book of Exodus, where they beat the people, then they ask.
So
it's a really interesting detail.
Right. The fact that that's there means... Okay, let me put it this way. So for example, Bob Ryer, which I was going to bring up, but for example, Bob Ryer will say something like, the Pharaoh's magicians, I could be mispronouncing this, but Sheshparonk is apparently the Coptic or Egyptian equivalent to the magician in the text.
Well,
something like
every Harry Tep was a magician.
Okay.
Every priest. Okay, every priest could. There were these especially lector priests. Lector priests were did spells, incantations. But the Mejunecher, the holy words, these were psalms and spells and religious texts. Okay. They didn't actually have a word that was separate for just a magician. Not until the really, really late periods.
You see, that's kind of like what I was getting at, because is it only limited to a particular dynastic period in Egypt where, I guess, in this case, beating the Sheshparonk thing? And
no, it isn't.
Okay.
Especially not the magic stuff.
Okay.
Because there's accounts that go way back to even the Old Kingdom on this.
Okay.
Like one of the things we find in, say, Old Kingdom and Middle Kingdom texts is the whole idea of water magic. And this is really interesting because the Egyptians felt that water magic was something that only an Egyptian wise men could do. Like fold a river in half. Or
right. What does that look like? Did they even describe what it would look like?
They described it. They described it to look. They said it looks like the folding of a cloth.
Okay.
Like a bolt of cloth being folded on top of itself.
All right.
Okay.
And
I'm not saying this really happened, but I'm just saying that's how they described it.
Okay.
They would describe these specially gifted priests who could ride on the backs of crocodiles across the river. They didn't need a boat.
Right. Okay.
Water magic was really integral to the whole idea of Egyptian magic. And it makes sense because they're a river culture. So if you have a river culture, your powerful entities are going to do water magic. It's kind of like the last airbender, but with water. So now you get a parting of the Red Sea. Okay, now think about this. Think about this for a moment. You've got the Israelites. They're back against the water. The desert, Balsafon. They're boxed in. Okay. On the other hand, you got the chariots of Pharaoh, and they're just stopped by a wind. They can't pass the wind. Now, all of a sudden, the water opens up, and the Israelites pass through, and the wind subsides.
Mm-hmm.
You come from a culture of river magic.
Right.
What is your intuition going to be?
Mm.
The gods have handed the Israelites into our hands because the gods have opened up the waters for us. Just like Jedi, just like the old priests.
And then they get what's the word? Like they get let down. I was thinking for a more formal word than let down. Like they get let down by their own gods, right?
They get sucked in.
Right.
They get sucked in by their own myths, their own cultural predispositions here.
Right. And the story would, the fact that it's written that way, would there be a future Egyptian that would be reading this sort of like in hindsight going, ooh, that's an interesting polemic to me, to sort of, in other words, it's like an apologetic.
Well, we don't find a lot of it after.
Right.
All these stories of water magic come from the Middle and Old Kingdom. We don't see it after.
And what's the BC? What's the era like BC wise?
2000 BC and earlier.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because I find it very interesting. God specifically says, "Oh, by the way, turn around, go back to Baal." Baal.
Baal Zephon. Yeah, they've made their escape good out of the Wadi Tumalot. It doesn't make sense to go north at that point, but that's what they do. They should actually, after they leave the Wadi Tumalot, they should head on the path that they ultimately take, which is south along the west coast of the Sinai. That's what makes military sense. But instead, they go north. They get close to Migdol, which is on the militarized road across the North Sinai. They get spotted by Pi-Hahiroth, which could be a watchtower, which is very likely a watchtower.
Yeah. So
now you've got all these reports coming from these various towns and fortresses, like Baal Zephon, Pi-Hahiroth, Migdol, saying they've spotted these Israelites wandering around there, and all those reports are going to go right back to Pharaoh. God is baiting Pharaoh to pursue him.
Is there any legit? Okay, just a quick backtracking question, and then connected to now the water parting. Bruce Wells, in his Zonovan background Bible commentary on Exodus, showcased he has a chart showing, because you just said a moment ago, God baiting Pharaoh. So the hardening of Pharaoh's heart, that apparently you have a hardening to do the wrong thing, which is keep the Israelites. I think it's kabod. And then you have the zek, which is the hardening, but it's to do the right thing. And it's apparently you have this 19 times. And then, so in other words, God's hardening Pharaoh's heart, but to do the right thing. But Pharaoh, in his own free will, is opposing that with his own hardening version.
Yeah, he hardens his heart, then God hardens his heart.
And then it's a reverse when the firstborn's killed. Is that a legitimate argument that Bruce Wells is making that?
I'd have to look at the text. I'd have to look at the text for the hardening of his heart with the firstborn.
Okay,
because I haven't actually looked at that particular text per se. And I like to be very cautious about these things. Sure.
Yeah. Because I was thinking of that when you mentioned, God baiting Pharaoh, and it's sort of with that. He's working with Pharaoh in the sense, and it's just the whole Romans 9 thing, the whole clay potter, Paul bringing up the whole Pharaoh thing again, and yeah,
definitely.
Right.
Yeah. Pharaoh was raised up to be an instrument.
Right.
To show the glory of God.
By the way, I found the spot where Hofmeyr, I'll just quickly show this to everyone here. This is the lecture he gave, where he's asked by the guy who's running the whole show. In 10 seconds, this is his understanding of Hofmeier's point, which then connects to what you were getting at a moment ago about the historicity of the Exodus. So this person says this.
So, while there is no archaeological evidence of Israel in Egypt, biblical text implies that they were in Egypt.
That's my argument.
That's your
my
argument.
So my line is: there's no evidence of the Hebrews in Egypt. There's evidence of Egypt in the Hebrew scriptures.
Yeah. See, you see, is that what you're also saying? Is
Yes, it is also what I'm saying.
in Egypt, but there's evidence of Egypt in the Hebrew scriptures.
Well, here's the thing. Here's what we have to understand about the Israelites too: is they don't actually become Israelites until they leave Egypt.
Sure. Right.
What they are in Egypt is Amoritic Semites, Asiatics. That's what they are in Egypt. What happens is when they leave Egypt, it's not just the descendants of Jacob. It's a mixed multitude.
Because the text does say Egyptians followed with them.
It says, Egyptians. You have Egyptians. You have other Amorites. You have Nubians. You have Magi. You have, as we said, other Egyptians. You have Libyans. Avaris was a very cosmopolitan city. Very cosmopolitan. So you have this melting pot of people that get grafted into the 12 tribes as they leave Egypt. And it is at that point that Israel becomes Israel, which is why you'll never find a sign in Egypt that says, here are the Israelites. Because they weren't Israelites. Some of them were sons of Israel, but they weren't Israelites.
Then connect that quickly to the Meneptah Stela. Why is that an actual Israel reading there?
Yes, that's an actual Israel reading.
Okay.
But it also happens a long time after. That's at least 40 to 50 years after the Exodus.
So this would be a beautiful argument then against the early date, because it's the presumption that the word or the name Israel is still around, and which again, at least Nacho is making that point. And yeah, I reckon that's a smoking gun argument. That this is the first time I'm hearing it, by the way, but the way you just said it actually makes a lot of sense. Yeah,
it's long after the Exodus.
Yeah, right.
And already into the conquest period.
Sure. I hope I'm not being shotgun and disorganized. I hope.
No. You're being very methodical. Much more methodical than I normally get.
Okay.
I get, what? You said what? Really?
Right. Yeah. Okay. Then that being said, I'm just going to put it out there. Here's a little bit of, I'm sort of like a fanboy, Bob Rye, but I'm hoping to you giving your 2 cents on this.
This you know what 2 cents is worth these days, right?
Oh, especially on the type of coinage as well, right? So,
yeah.
So here, I've just skipped, obviously, most of his lecture. He just gives a background of Joseph, and this is the bit where he starts to go into. Oh, whoops! This is the bit where he starts to go into
where he sticks out his tongue at us.
Yeah. Just let me know if you can hear what he's saying, and then I'll keep playing, and tell me when to pause it. So here we go.
Okay, I can't hear him. Nope,
okay,
no hear.
Okay, wait. Let me see here. Let me try that again. Can you hear him now?
Nope.
Okay, that's interesting. Share the audio. Click on that. Let's see if this works now. Maybe I'll mute myself. Maybe turn your volume up. Let's see what happens.
Uh-uh.
All right, then. You know what?
He can do a voiceover.
What's this video file thing? That's bizarre. That's not working. So everyone's saying we can't.
Must be the Egyptian gods.
Yeah,
They're not happy about this.
Maybe. Right. Okay, I'm gonna choose a question outside. Quickly answer. I mean, go for it. Like,
Quickly
the
answer.
question.
I mean, yes or no?
Not quickly. But if there's any questions out there while I figure this out, and then I'll play. Okay, here's one question by Katie. I heard the plagues was also like God stomping on the Egyptian gods, that each plague pertained to just something I saw.
Okay. Now, it does say in the biblical text that God, held a contest to defeat the gods of Egypt. That's true. But I think the plagues are more than that. Because one of the things is when scholars have tried to, say, correlate each plague to a specific god of Egypt, that breaks down pretty fast. So I think there's more going on with the plagues than just a contest against the gods of Egypt. I think what God is doing there is he's tapping deep into the Egyptian psyche of what terrified them, what made them afraid, what biases they had. And I think that God was using the Egyptians' own culture against them. Does that answer the question?
I would say, yeah. I would agree with that. Yeah. I mean,
But I didn't give you much time.
Right.
Let's see how fast you can answer questions.
Okay, here's another one. Wait, so the God of Israel used miracles that were familiar with that culture and showed it off to their own gods that sucked?
Yes.
You just hit the world record with that answer. Right. Okay. I'm gonna figure this out ASAP. So, question. Let's see here. Dr. Falk said that there were also other groups of people that were grafted into the Asiatic Exodus. Did those people, including Nubians and Egyptians, follow Moses, and why did they leave?
Why did they leave? Because they were promised a land flowing with milk and honey, just like the Israelites were. And they did leave with Moses, and they followed him. There's even one place where Moses marries a Cushite woman. So we know that Cushites were part of the mixed multitude. So yes, they were a part of the mixed multitude.
Okay, I'm gonna test it now. I'm gonna change it to stereo mix, and if it starts playing, let me know if you can hear it.
Nope.
Oh my gosh. What the heck? This is working before. What on earth is going on?
Did you update your Windows box recently? Now I can't hear you.
Okay, that was
Much better.
okay.
Now I'm
Okay.
losing everyone's voice.
One more test, and then if it doesn't work, then sorry, folks, but no Bob Ryer. Another one is there any current archaeological work being done either in Egypt or Canaan that you believe will yield more proof of the Exodus account?
Well, there's always more. I mean, more data is always going to be better. You know, even in stuff that you don't think is necessarily going to correlate directly to the Exodus or say Canaan, can give you a broader understanding of things that you just, you know, didn't appreciate prior. So, you know, I don't think we can say just limit it to say the excavations at Pi-Ramses or Avaris, even though there's only an excavation going on at Avaris right now and not Pi-Ramses. But I think that, for example, we can there's an excavation going on right now at Tel Rotaba, Pithom, that I think is producing some very interesting results. There's also, I believe, some work going on at Tel Mascuda as well. I think they found a Ramesside inscription there just recently. So I think there's some very interesting work going on in the Wadi Tumilat, which is very, very interesting because the Wadi Tumilat also had high Asiatic Semite populations. And I think this is one of the reasons why the Israelites exit through the Wadi Tumilat in the way they did as well, is to pick up those populations that were also in Pithom and Sukkoth. And both of those are cities and towns inside the Wadi Tumilat.
Okay, can you hear me now? Because I
can hear you.
Okay, now here we go. One more test.
He doesn't want to be buried in Egypt either, right? And the story ends by telling us that they embalmed Joseph and laid him in his coffin, right?
Yep.
Now, the story is an interesting one for a lot of
good.
reasons. First, we got a lot of numbers. You know, 11 is interesting. 7, you got 7, 11. 3 features also. Remember, you have the 3 cakes on the head. A lot of threes, a lot of numbers.
Don't know what he's talking about there.
Were there ever a large number of Israelites in Egypt? What can we make of the story, right? And what I want to do today is kind of look at the story in an Egyptological view. Does it ring true? You see, there are 2 ways you can try to verify a story. One is you can look at external evidence. Do we have statues of Joseph? Do we have statues of Jacob?
No.
We don't have anybody named Joseph in Egypt. There's no record that talks about a Joseph in Egypt. We don't.
Yeah, you can stop right there. We wouldn't expect to find a statue of Joseph just because he was a vizier under the Hyksos. So most of the context of, say, that Hyksos city was pretty much destroyed by environmental factors. So even if there was such a statue of Joseph, it probably was destroyed. So
what do you think about the patterns and evidence sort of argument that in patterns of
it's
evidence,
totally bogus.
they show that a Joseph statue, and
It's totally bogus.
Right.
Okay, that statue dates to the early 13th dynasty, possibly late 12th. Okay, so it's at the very, very beginning of the Hyksos rule. Very, very beginning, even before they're even established as self-rules, as a self-ruling city. That statue was planted. Okay, so there's a real serious timing issue there. Okay. Joseph enters the city, becomes part of the Hyksos bureaucracy sometime after 1666 BC. So this is after the introduction of the chariot. This is after this is already into the 15th dynasty. Okay, so that statue is way too early. The other thing that the patterns of evidence doesn't tell you is that there wasn't just 12 tombs there. There was like 24 tombs. There was much more than, and that whole area was a graveyard. Even the supposed palace with 12 columns was really another tomb. Okay.
Right.
There's a lot of things that you weren't told in patterns of evidence that sort of discredit this story.
Oh boy. I feel depressed in his shoes. The the documentator's shoes.
Well, the documenter kind of knew this. Okay.
Oh, okay.
All right. Let's be really. Let's get some straight. Let's get some straight talk here about patterns of evidence.
Right.
They were not expecting you to believe every single detail of Roll's yarn. What they wanted you to take away was a skepticism of chronology. If you look at who was behind the film, you see a lot of people who were both, say, early date Exodus and young Earth creationists.
I see. Yeah.
Okay. And one thing that both Roll and the early date Exodus people sort of dislike, as well as young Earth creationists, is conventional chronology. So that first film was to really soften you up, get you into a mode of achronological thinking. That was its purpose.
Asynchronous, right?
Achronological thinking.
Right.
The second film was supposed to give you, say, evidence of the Hebrews, Israelites being there through Petrovich's phony translations. And then the third film was to get you into ageographical thinking.
Wait, there's a third one?
There's a third one. The Red
I
Sea
thought there was only
Miracle.
two.
No, there's three.
Oh. Well, I haven't seen
That
the
one
third
starred. That one.
Okay.
That one featured Glenn Fritz,
Okay.
and that one proposes that the Red Sea, the Reed Sea, was the Gulf of Aqaba, and that Mount Sinai was a volcano that's really not a volcano at Jebel al-Lawz in Saudi Arabia. It's the Saudi Arabia
what?
hypothesis.
They're actually making that argument.
Oh yeah, they're actually making that argument. They even show
wow.
the chariot wheels of Ron Wyatt.
Oh my god! No. By the way, I've never done this on camera before, but oh my god! Because I saw Mountain of Fire again. Going back to that. Remember my uncle with the whole ancient aliens? Like he's like, look at this documentary called Mountain of Fire. See the black thing on top and the Jebel al-Lawz thing, and I was
It's
like,
not a volcano.
Yeah,
it's not a volcano.
And Hoffmeyer says that in Israel and Egypt, in the 99 book, he actually tackles that back in that book, which pre-exists the documentary that was released in the 2000s, and yeah. Oh boy, yeah.
Yes. I don't have kind words for those films. I'm sorry. Look, I mean, I think this leads Christians astray.
Sure.
I think this gives it's telling a story, but not a story that's a true story. So what ends up happening is Christians start hitching their faith on this, and then some skeptic comes along and blows it out of the water like he's ripping through tissue paper, and it leaves Christians' faith in tatters. It's a terrible thing. I had a guy come on my channel just a couple days ago who said, I came to Christ because of Ron Wyatt. And now you're telling me that Ron Wyatt was a huckster and a charlatan? How can I believe any of this is true?
Exactly.
These people do real damage.
Folks, Ron Wyatt, just so anyone if no one here, if anyone here doesn't know who Ron Wyatt is, he's the guy that claimed he had the blood of Jesus, where, according to him, when he did a blood analysis of that blood, 1 Y chromosome and 23X. And it's like, that's impossible, first and foremost. And then he goes and says, look, the cross that Jesus was crucified on, the blood seeped into the cracks of the ground and then hit the skull of Adam. This is Ron Wyatt. Like Adam's skull was underneath the cross and the blood seeped down and
then touched the mercy seat on the Ark of the Covenant.
yes, and the Ark of the Covenant was under
there
that
too.
as well. Like, yeah.
You know, I got an email just the other day from some guy saying, "Hey, you know, I got this site, did the site survey, and I found where the Ark of the Covenant is, and it's under Golgotha." And I'm thinking, oh man, not this again. Gee, I wonder where you got that from.
Right. And I remember seeing that video when he was still alive. Again, this is 11 years ago now, when I started getting into this for the first time. It was, especially back then when YouTube was a new thing as well. And
yeah,
I remember him getting very like emotional in the video, like, oh, this is, you know, he starts to cry. This is the blood of Christ, and I could sort of see the crowd reacting, you know, likewise. But again, it's emotions that's sort of selling the game, not.
It is. It's entirely emotions that are selling this game. It's telling a story. It's taking people on a vicarious adventure of discovery. Okay,
like an Indiana Jones sort of thing.
Like an Indiana Jones thing, where you're going on an adventure with a real archaeologist, and you get to explore and see these discoveries firsthand along with them. And this bolsters your faith because it gives you sufficient evidence to believe it's true. Well, yeah, it's not very good evidence.
Well,
excuse me.
Oh. All right, I'm going to put you back in the hot seat with Bob Ryer.
Okay.
And I'm going to start playing again. And tell me again when to pause.
Internal evidence. Does the story hang together? Does it make a consistent, coherent tale? It's interesting. Let's look at it. First, let's talk about the story of Potiphar, right? Where Joseph is unjustly accused.
Stop for a moment. The Potiphar is actually an Egyptian name. It comes from the words Padi-Re, which is he is the gift of Re. So that's an Egyptian detail right there.
You are about to spoil it.
Am I? I'm sorry. Spoilers!
Yeah. This is why I want to see how you would react. Yeah.
Go on.
All right.
On Potiphar's wife. There happens to be an ancient Egyptian short story called The Tale of Two Brothers, which has just this feature. The good brother is working in the fields. The wife of the bad wife of one brother makes advances. He refuses it. She accuses him. So there's an Egyptian kind of tradition for this sort of story, right? It's not that impressive. What about Potiphar's name? It's an Egyptian name. It's a little bit garbled in the telling, but Padi, it's probably Padi-Re, means Pa.
I'm surprised.
Means given by Re, by Ra, the sun god. So Padi-Re means given by the sun god. So Potiphar, at least, is a good name. It makes sense in Egyptian terms.
Any thoughts on that? I mean,
I will say one thing about the Tale of Two Brothers, and he is right. It's not an uncommon tale in Egyptian culture. The fact is that infidelity in Egyptian culture was absolutely rife. Egyptians were in and out of marriage all the time. They could divorce easily and they could marry easily. So marriage in Egyptian culture was a revolving door. Now, what makes the crime of Joseph more unique is that it crossed class cultural boundaries.
Okay.
Okay. And the crime went both ways here. It wasn't just the crime of a slave raping a free woman of high rank, but it's a free woman who's married having sex with a slave. That too was a crime. It's not the act of infidelity that was the crime. It was the crossing of cultural, social barriers that was the crime.
Interesting. Right. Okay.
Now, there's another. See, we're doing a little bit of the other approach towards Egyptian history that I mentioned, a philological approach, looking at language. Now, there's a wonderful, wonderful bit of evidence in Pharaoh's magicians. Now, remember, the magicians are called to interpret the dreams, but they can't. They don't know what the 7 lean, ears of corn are, what the fat cows are doing. They don't understand it. But in the Bible, it says Pharaoh called for his magicians. Now, remember back to the lesson on language, that the latest form of Egyptian language, the latest form of the writing, is Coptic. Coptic was ancient Egyptian written in Greek, and the Copts, the Christians in Egypt, have their Bible, the Christian Bible, right? But they have the Old Testament, and they tell the story. They write the story. They have an Old Testament too, and they tell the story of Joseph. What is the word in Coptic for magician? That's going to be the clue. The word for Coptic, the word in Coptic for magician in the Coptic Bible is seshperanch, seshperanch. Now, remember, Coptic is ancient Egyptian. So does seshperanch mean anything? The answer is yes. Seshperanch is really 3 words. Sesh means scribe.
Scribe of the House of Life.
Is house.
Yep. Do you want me to keep playing or?
You can keep playing.
Yep. Okay.
Is life. The magicians are the scribes of the House of Life. Now, the House of Life in Egypt was basically a theological college. It was a school associated with a temple, the House of Life, where priests were trained. So this rings true. To interpret a dream, the priests of the House of Life.
Yeah, that's iffy. Yeah, that's kind of iffy at that point. He's sort of, at this point, he's invoking a lot of anachronism. Okay. Now, that may be true in later periods, but it certainly was not something that we find, at least commonplace, in earlier times.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm always reticent to take something in Coptic and transmit it back in time. Just like we don't take words in modern English and say, oh, it's something that we find in English today, so it must have been in Elizabethan times.
I see. Right.
Languages don't quite work that way.
And naturally so as well.
Yeah.
Hence anachronisms, yeah. Right.
Yeah. So I think what he's saying there is a little bit anachronistic. I think that what he's doing here is he's taking, say, the Coptic translation of the Bible, where it goes magician, and he's using the Coptic words of that particular day, which is the 1st century, and then say go trying to project that backwards.
But is it a legitimate? Again, just explain to me that those 3 words.
Well, sesh is scribe.
Yeah.
There was
is there a connection to?
Well, here's the thing: the seshperanch is it is an Egyptian phrase. It is an Egyptian phrase, but it's not an Egyptian phrase that you say commonly find in, say, the Ramesside era or the New Kingdom.
I see.
You do find scribes, all sorts of scribes. You find House of Life even. Okay. But the idea that combination of Sesh Perronk being a magician, that's the anachronism.
I see. So wait, is it when you said
Because here's the thing: a scribe is a bureaucrat.
Yep.
That's what a scribe is. He's not a magician. He's not a priest. Sesh is the word for scribe.
Okay.
He's a guy that basically tabulates grain silos. He goes on campaign with other soldiers and counts the dead hands, to give the tabulation of how many dead there were. He keeps track of what's in the treasury. He's an accountant. He's an accountant. He'll copy sacred texts because he's good at writing. But the Hemnetcher, the priest, the servant of the gods, those were priests. Those were your magicians in the Ramesside period and earlier. Sesh, scribes, they weren't magicians.
Okay.
Okay. So he's using an anachronism here.
Okay. But just quickly, is there a reason why that word in Coptic appeared in Coptic the way it did?
Because all language changes.
Okay.
All language changes over time.
Okay.
And at that point, what you have in Coptic is a thoroughly Christianized culture. You see, what happens after when Christianity comes to Egypt is Egypt kind of goes through a divide. You have certain areas that become very pagan, very say around the cult centers like Hermopolis and Thebes. They tend to be more pagan centered. But you also have areas that become mostly Christian, like Alexandria. It becomes mostly Christian at that point. And even into the deep south, into like Kush, you find much more, say, Christian strongholds down there too.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. All right. Here we go.
Neat that you got this through Coptic, a little bit of internal verification. It's starting to make sense in Egyptian terms. Now, let me get a little further into this thing about priests interpreting dreams.
Yes.
In the Joseph story, Joseph's real skill isn't having dreams. It's not like today we think that people who have prophetic dreams are special, the Gene Dixon types or whatever. That wasn't it in Egypt. The Egyptians believed that everybody had prophetic dreams.
That's true.
They believed that every dream was prophetic.
No, that's not right. The Egyptians believed that dreams could be prophetic, but they didn't believe that every dream was prophetic. Okay, and frankly, the Egyptians to this day still believe that dreams can tell the future. We've got this papyrus called Chester Beatty III, Papyrus Chester Beatty III, which is often called the Dream Book, which all it is a book of interpretations of various dreams. And it's a real simple book. It starts off with one phrase, if a man sees himself in a dream, and then it's a list after that of various scenarios that he sees himself in. Eating meat, eating an egg, and then it comes up with the interpretation, and it'll be good or bad. And like good, you'll come into a huge inheritance. Bad, your friends will all hate you. Stuff like that. And that's sort of the structure of the dream papyrus. Is it if you see yourself in a dream and it's this, either good or bad, then this is the interpretation of that. Now, it's interesting that some of Joseph's dreams have normally been considered to be bad, but he gives the opposite interpretation. And that's very interesting. Like when Joseph squeezes the wine into the cup of Pharaoh, when he sees that the cupbearer, he squeezes the wine into the cup of Pharaoh. Now, a normal Egyptian priest would say that's a bad dream. It means ruin's coming.
Mm-hmm.
But Joseph says that's a good dream, that you'll be serving Pharaoh again in no time. Hey, buddy, remember me when you're there.
All right. Right. Hey, buddy. I mean, I just wish they conversed with each other with that sort of lingo. That would be hilarious. Like, if we could go back in time and program them to think like that. Like, Well, I mean, the audience is sort of anticipating you could be spoiling this one as well. So, yeah, but by the way, this is absolutely great because I thoroughly I'm enjoying the fact that I'm calibrating, you with this. But technically, it's an ancient lecture. It's like 20 years old. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, things change. Scholarship changes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is why you have to have specialists that keep up with the scholarship, because it does change.
And that was Joseph's skill. Joseph isn't special because he has prophetic dreams. Everybody has them. Cupbearer, baker, Pharaoh. Joseph knows how to interpret them. Now, in ancient Egypt, the priests were the interpreters of the dreams. Now, how did you get your dream interpreted? Well, the answer is you went to the temple and you asked the priest. Now, one of the things that sort of bothered me for a long time in the Joseph story is that when Pharaoh calls his magicians to interpret the dream, they say, we don't know. That doesn't sound right. I mean, usually you get a magician, he's going to give you an interpretation of some sort. Why are these guys saying we don't know? Well, let me try to give you my answer to that. In ancient Egypt, when you went to a temple for an interpretation of a dream, they didn't freewheel. They didn't just say off the top of their heads, oh, that means this. No. They looked it up in a book.
That's correct.
There were books of dream interpretation in the temples. There is a papyrus in the British Museum, which is a book for interpreting dreams.
Yeah, that's just to B3.
It's an interesting papyrus. What it's got, in one column it says, if a man sees himself, that's it, if a man sees himself. And then you've got another column saying, and it gives the dream. So it'll say, if a man sees himself with a dwarf, and that's a real dream listed in the book. If a man sees himself with a dwarf, then comes the interpretation, bad. And then detailed interpretation, half his life is gone. I guess the idea is the dwarf is like half a man, maybe. But this dream book had dream after dream. And you would look up the dream. So, for example, there's a dream. If a man sees his enemies making offerings, bad. People are working against him. So there are lots of lists and lists of dreams. Now, you went to a temple, the priest would take out the book and say, all right, let's look it up. Right? He unrolls his papyrus. This isn't in the dream book of Pharaoh's magicians. He's got a dream. 7 lean ears of corn devouring 7 fat ears. They look it up in the book. Nothing like that, Pharaoh. Right? So I think this is the explanation as to why, just why, the magicians say, no, we can't interpret it. It bothered me because you think magicians would usually make these things up.
That's reasonable.
But I think the Egyptian dream book, the existence of an Egyptian dream book, to a great extent confirms the way dreams are dealt with in the Joseph. You're special if you can interpret them, not if you have them, and not all dreams can be interpreted. If it's not in the book, you're stuck, right? So Joseph has...
That's no problem with any of that.
The story has a lot of ring of truth in it. Let me ask you, give you another one. 7 lean years are going to happen, right? Remember the 7 fat years and then 7 lean? Now, 7, first of all, is a magical number in Egyptian. It's a magical number. There are 7 celestial cows. There are 7 sacred oils. 7 is a big number. What about 7 years of famine? Well, is there any evidence in Egypt that there was ever this kind of phenomenon? The answer is yes. In Sehel Island, now Sehel Island is in the southern part of Egypt, right next to Aswan. It's a large island in the middle of the Nile, covered with boulders, And the boulders are great. They're big black boulders, and they're inscribed with hieroglyphs. When anybody wanted to say anything that he had done was great, he would go to Sehel Island, have it chiseled on, and it's there for eternity. So you got all kinds of things. You got military campaigns recorded. We came, we saw, we conquered, this.
You're going to make me watch a lot more of this.
No, I can stop there. I mean, it was sort of getting into the dream book with respect to Joseph. I mean, but I can stop there. I don't want to,
Bore me to death.
Yeah, because you're agreeing with a lot of what he's saying there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not terrible.
Okay. Yeah.
Which is a pleasant surprise, but I still don't want to be bored to death.
Okay. All right. Okay, no, but that actually, to be honest, yeah, you're right. That was sort of the main points I want to get across, like that Shesh Barong thing, and
yeah, that's just an anachronism.
Yeah.
If that's the worst thing about that lecture, that's not a terrible thing.
Okay.
I've heard a lot worse. Patterns of evidence.
Okay. Is there any last? Because we're now 2 hours 15 minutes. I want to respect your time as well. Like, I hope you've enjoyed.
I have enjoyed coming on, except for that last bit.
Okay. Yeah. Is there anything that I may have missed, question-wise or perspective-wise? Like, yeah.
Look, there's a whole lot we could talk about. I mean, we could talk about the archaeology of Avaris. We could talk about the archaeology of Paramses. We could talk about, chronology and how that plays into all this. There's a lot of different aspects to this study that, just proliferates. I mean, I've been on, people's YouTube channels and have talked about one thing and then come right back and talk about a completely different subject in the same sort of overall umbrella of the Exodus. Okay, so it's not something. I mean, this is the difficulty of doing something on. And here's something I really want to applaud. Michael Jones for even trying to do this in the first place. It's a tremendously difficult task that he tried to do. It's very, very difficult what he attempted. It's not a task for the timid. It's full of issues. It's full of various gotchas if you don't know the literature well.
When I saw the references he was using in that documentary, and even he made a meme out of it, that particular book that with the blue cover, Did I Not Bring Israel Out of Egypt, by Hofmeyr. And
I like that book.
But that book is a late date, and I know, because
it is
I
a
saw
late date. Yeah.
So that's the thing. It's like, is it, again, IP? I love you. I'm not trying to throw you under the bus here, but it's just, is there a cherry picking thing going on? Like, for example, the skeletons of the lambs. Like,
well, he admits he made a mistake there.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
And I'm willing to leave it at just that. That
Right,
he's seen the light. He's following the evidence. He's doing everything right at this point.
Sweet.
He's doing the right thing. He's redoing that video, and I will be there to help him. to do that video. And it's very, very encouraging that we still have people around with the integrity to say, okay, I made a mistake, and then do it right.
But you see,
that's really encouraging.
But you see, I know IP. That is actually who he is. He has huge integrity in that sense. And my frustration is a little bit of impatience, because I said, look, I'm still pushing for more peer review on the stuff, because he gave me a little bit of that to sort of review through, and I looked at it, but I was still a little bit, be careful. Yeah, anyway, but the point is,
and it really doesn't help that Egyptology is an opaque field. It's an opaque field. It's very, very difficult to get competency in it. You know, we see this all the time where we get PhDs in Old Testament who think they can add a little bit of Egyptology on and come out sounding competent. It doesn't work that way. It's actually easier to go the other direction than it is. It's easier to be competent as an Old Testament scholar coming from Egyptology than it is to be competent in Egyptology coming from Old Testament. And it comes down to corpus and sources. In the Old Testament, what you're dealing with is one rather small corpus, but a huge amount of secondary literature. Okay? But with Egyptology, you're talking about a huge amount of primary literature. Massive, massive amount of primary literature. Massive amount of archaeological reports. Massive amounts of various other sundry disciplines that are involved with it. So you're dealing with huge amounts of primary data. And you've got to be able to cope with thousands of manuscripts. It's a really daunting challenge for anyone who doesn't devote themselves to it. And that's always going to be the challenge of Egyptology, is you just sort of can't skim the literature, pick out what you like, and think you're getting the whole story, because you're probably not.
Well, don't you know that the Giza pyramids are like batteries that generate electricity?
The granaries, right? And alien landing pads.
Yeah. I mean, you've literally skipped, 10, like, I think you yourself said this, 10 years, education.
It took me 10 years.
Yeah.
10 years of graduate study. That's not undergrad, that's graduate.
For you to be brainwashed so that you don't believe in the pyramids.
Don't believe in the aliens.
Yeah. I suppose this is a tongue-in-cheek question, but are you related to Danny Falk, the astronomer?
No.
All right, settled. And then super chat. Does Dr. Falk know of good books on Old Testament text criticism, JDP, and where it succeeds and fails? How scholars sort the dates of different pericopes or pericopes?
The best book, I think, on the documentary hypothesis was probably done by Casuto.
Oh,
now, the problem is it's in Italian.
Ooh.
It might have been translated. I'm not sure if it was, but Casuto did the best work on the documentary hypothesis. Okay. As far as Old Testament text criticism, there was a Jewish scholar. I wish I could remember his name off the top of my head at the moment. There's an excellent one, and I just cannot remember his name at the moment.
Okay.
But he's sort of the big name in Old Testament textual criticism.
Is it recent, by the way?
Recent. He's still alive. He's still alive.
I think I might have it, because I know there was a conference in Israel about this.
Let's see here. Take me a while to look it up here. Um,
Baden? Joel Baden?
no, that's not it.
Okay.
Emmanuel Tove. Emmanuel
Oh, yeah.
Tove.
Okay.
Yeah, he's the authority on textual criticism.
Okay. I'm just looking for one that was released. Is this it? Oh, anyway, I'll probably be wasting time looking for it. But I remember there was a conference in 2013, and this guy compiled the notes, sort of being a little bit critical of JDP. And for example, there's one whole chapter dedicated to Genesis 6 to 9 and how the documentary hypothesis shows that you have the various sources in those chapters, but he goes out of his way to say, no. I mean, yes, maybe, but not really.
I think any good theory should explain the data in a more productive way. That's the essence of a good theory. A good theory should make whatever data you're handling easier to comprehend, easier to understand, add insight into it. And I don't think the documentary hypothesis really accomplishes that. I think it adds confusion. I think people are still debating over what is J, E, P, and D. We now have got the situation where we've got D1, D2, D3, D5, etc. So it hasn't actually brought clarity to the data. All it's done is added confusion to it. So I don't think it's a good theory in that respect. I think in order for it to be a good theory, it would take a serious overhaul. And I don't think that using a theory based upon texts that don't actually exist is a really sound methodological approach to construct a theory on the origins of the texts.
I found it as well. This is the name of the book. It's by Joshua A. Berman. Inconsistency in the Torah, Ancient Literary Convention, and the Limits of Source Criticism. And he goes through it. This is Oxford publication.
Who is the author on that?
Joshua A.
Josh Berman?
Berman, Joshua A. Berman.
I know him. Like him.
Okay. Yeah, this was published in.
I actually spent some time with him in Egypt in February.
Okay, interesting. Okay. Yeah, he in fact notice he actually talks about Ramses 2, Exodus 13. This is chapter 2,
he's a well-recognized expert on the Battle of Kadesh.
Ah, interesting. Okay.
Very his work on the Battle of Kadesh is excellent.
Okay.
Not just good, excellent.
So then, because I remember I was doing some studies with respect to the flood, and the very last chapter here it is source criticism and its biases, and there's the flood narrative, and so this is the book I was thinking of with respect to the question. And is this the same trajectory like you would?
I think it probably is the same trajectory, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly where he stands on that.
Sure.
I know his work from the Kaddish inscriptions. Okay. And we have a couple mutual friends too.
Okay. All right.
Well, that's just it. In scholarly circles, everyone knows everyone else.
Sure.
It surprises people when I tell them, I'm friends with William Deaver.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
The patterns of evidence, devil in that documentary, right? How dare he? Yeah. No,
we talk to each other every time we go to conference together.
Right. Yeah.
I've had coffee with the guy.
Okay, Dr. Falk. Any closing remarks?
Buy my
leave it
book
there.
and watch my YouTube channel.
Okay, I'll definitely put your YouTube.
And I
link
do
in.
have a Patreon account. We are trying to do new projects. We hope to be someday coming out with a book on the Exodus, but all that takes funding. So if your audience can help, by even just subscribing to our YouTube channel, that's helpful. If they want to go further with helping with research, please buy my book or become a Patreon member.
And your YouTube is Ancient Egypt and the Bible?
And the Bible.
And the Bible, yep.
Mm-hmm. And the link to Patreon is on there.
Okay. All right, I'm going to end the live stream. And,
Awesome. I had a great time.
Thank you so much. And I know your
Thank
next
you.
interview is going to be on capturing Christianity. I don't know how that's going
If
to
he
go.
gets his computer working.
Oh, okay. Right. You mean you were meant to be on before?
Hmm?
Were you meant to be on before?
No. His computer just crashed.
Oh.
So he's had to cancel some of his appointments.
Oh, okay.
So if he gets it back in time, then I probably will be on. If I'm not, then it'll be delayed.
Okay. Well, he won't be as eccentric as me. He's definitely more laid back. Just explain it to me. Just breadcrumbs on the cookie shelf sort of thing. For my grandma sort of. I mean, this is not to say anything negative of CC. I like CC, and he does a good job. He's a blessing. So, but yeah, I appreciate you coming on, David.
Well, thank you very much for having me. This was a lot of fun. I did enjoy it.
God bless you as well, and God bless everyone.
God bless
outside.
you as well.
Thank you.